Welcome to Nationalize. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. On September 26, 2025, the U.S. Supreme Court delivered a decision that would reverberate far beyond America's borders. In a historic move, the court overturned the Trump administration's sweeping tariffs, declaring the use of the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, for imposing broad tariffs unconstitutional. The ruling challenged the very foundation of how emergency powers had been interpreted for decades. The decision sent shockwaves through global markets, triggering immediate volatility on Wall Street and forcing a dramatic reassessment of America's trade strategy by investors, businesses, and governments worldwide. For years, tariffs had been the administration's main tool for negotiating with foreign powers, reshaping global supply chains, and sparking trade disputes that rippled across continents. Industries from agriculture to technology felt the impact, as companies scrambled to adapt to new rules and shifting alliances. The court's ruling is a powerful check on executive power, sending a clear message about the limits of presidential authority. While it creates uncertainty for policymakers and businesses, it also opens the door to a potential reset in global economic relations and trade negotiations. This video will explore the legal, economic, and political impacts of this historic decision, examining how it could reshape the balance of power between Congress and the White House. We'll take a closer look at the statutes at the heart of the dispute, the immediate fallout in the business world, and the long-term implications for American industries, workers, and the future of global trade. The ruling has ignited a national conversation about the proper limits of presidential authority in trade policy, raising questions about checks and balances in a rapidly changing world. As the administration vows to pursue protectionism through other means, the story is far from over. This is just the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter in America's economic story, with consequences that will be felt for years to come. The Trump tariffs were the result of a campaign promise to rewrite trade deals and revive American manufacturing. The administration first used Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act to impose duties on steel and aluminum, straining ties with allies. The real escalation came with IEEPA, originally meant for targeted sanctions, now used to justify tariffs on hundreds of billions in Chinese imports. Critics argued this bypassed Congress's constitutional authority over trade, and a lower court agreed, setting up the Supreme Court showdown. Businesses faced chaos and rising costs, while the administration defended its actions as necessary to fix decades of flawed trade policy. This clash between free trade and protectionism, and between Congress and the president, defined the era and made the court's intervention inevitable. The legal battle centered on two laws: IEEPA, granting the president emergency powers, and Section 232, a slower process tied to national security. IEEPA allowed rapid, unilateral action, perfect for escalating trade wars, but legally risky. Section 232, by contrast, requires investigations, and is more procedurally constrained, making it more resilient in court. The administration's gamble on IEEPA let it pressure China quickly, but opponents argued Congress never intended it for broad tariffs. The Supreme Court had to decide if the president could use emergency powers to bypass established trade laws. Sensing legal trouble, the administration began shifting to Section 232 for new tariffs, especially as the court's decision loomed. This pivot showed they knew IEEPA was on shaky ground. The outcome would redefine the limits of presidential power in trade. The Supreme Court, under the leadership of Chief Justice Roberts, was confronted with a pivotal and far-reaching question. Could the president truly invoke the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to impose sweeping tariffs as a tool of trade policy, rather than for its intended purpose of addressing genuine national emergencies? This case was not just about tariffs, but about the very limits of presidential authority and the separation of powers at the heart of the Constitution. In a landmark and closely watched decision, the court ruled decisively, no, IEEPA was never designed to serve as a blanket justification for broad economic protectionism. The justices emphasized that the law's original intent was to address true emergencies, not to bypass established trade policy frameworks. The court pointed to existing trade laws, such as Section 232 and Section 301, which already grant the president certain powers over trade. Allowing emergency powers to override these carefully crafted statutes, the justices argued, would fundamentally disrupt the constitutional balance between the executive and legislative branches. The ruling immediately invalidated major tariffs, especially those targeting Chinese goods, and triggered a logistical crisis as businesses and customs officials scrambled to process potential refunds and untangle months of complex trade paperwork. With this decision, the president was stripped of a powerful trade weapon, forcing the administration to rethink its entire strategy on international commerce and economic negotiations. The Supreme Court's message was unmistakable. Presidential power, while significant, has clear limits, especially when it threatens to encroach on Congress's constitutional authority to regulate trade and economic policy. This historic verdict is part of a broader judicial movement to clarify and define the boundaries of executive power in the modern era, ensuring that no branch of government can act without meaningful checks and balances. The court's decision triggered immediate economic upheaval. Tariffs on hundreds of billions in imports vanished overnight, creating chaos for customs and businesses. For many companies, the ruling promised relief from high costs, but raised complex questions about refunds for tariffs already paid. Economist Dr. Emily Chen noted the removal of tariffs could lower prices and ease inflation, but domestic industries now face fierce foreign competition. Markets reacted with volatility, import-heavy firms surged, while protected industries tumbled. The administration signaled it would use Section 232 to maintain protectionism, so the relief may be short-lived. Businesses now face uncertainty, unsure if new tariffs will replace the old. The legal question is settled, but the economic conflict continues. Politically, the ruling is a major check on presidential authority. The Trump administration lost a powerful tool for unilateral trade action, forcing it to rely on slower, more limited legal options. The decision reignites debate over the separation of powers, reaffirming Congress's central role in trade. Legal scholars see this as a turning point, with the court asserting its role as arbiter of executive limits. Both parties will use the ruling to rally their bases, but the fight over trade and executive power is far from over. The battlefield has shifted from executive orders to a deeper struggle over constitutional authority. The Supreme Court's decision reverberated worldwide. China saw it as a partial victory, but the US signaled the trade war wasn't over, just shifting tactics. Allies in Europe and Asia welcomed the move as a step toward stability, hoping for a return to rules-based trade. Yet caution remains. America's protectionist sentiment hasn't disappeared, and new tariffs could emerge under different laws. Foreign governments are watching closely as the US expands Section 232 investigations into new sectors. The uncertainty is driving countries to diversify trade and strengthen regional alliances. Even with IEEPA tariffs gone, the risk of US market disruption is seen as permanent. The world is adjusting to a more fragmented, unpredictable global economy. Experts agree, the court's decision is a watershed moment for law, economics, and politics. Political scientist Tara Lee Davis predicted market disruption if the administration lost, and that's exactly what happened. The administration remains defiant, vowing to use other legal tools to pursue its goals. Economist Dr. Emily Chen says consumers and importers will benefit, but domestic industries face tough adjustments. Legal scholars see the ruling as a landmark in defining presidential limits and defending the separation of powers. The verdict sends a clear message. Even in an era of strong presidents, the law and constitution set boundaries. The focus now shifts to how the administration and Congress will navigate this new legal landscape. The debate over trade, power, and America's global role is far from settled. The Supreme Court's decision to overturn the IEEPA tariffs is a turning point for American trade and presidential power. This landmark ruling has far-reaching implications, not just for the current administration, but for future presidencies as well. By striking down unilateral tariffs, the court reaffirmed Congress's authority and the rule of law. This decision underscores the importance of checks and balances in the American political system. The ruling dismantled a core part of the America First agenda, forcing a reckoning over the balance between executive action and constitutional order. It challenges the extent to which a president can act independently in matters of trade. The legal precedent limits emergency powers for economic protectionism, while the economic impact creates new winners, losers, and uncertainty. Businesses and investors are now navigating a new landscape of trade regulations. Politically, Congress may be emboldened, but the administration's pivot to other legal tools means trade battles will continue. The legislative and executive branches are now in a complex dance over trade policy. The fundamental struggle between globalist and nationalist visions remains at the heart of U.S. politics. This decision adds fuel to an already intense debate about America's role on the global stage. The court's decision sparks a vital debate about America's place in the world and the proper limits of presidential power. Legal scholars and policymakers alike are now re-evaluating the scope of executive authority. This moment will be remembered as when the judiciary recalibrated the balance of power, shaping the future of trade and governance. The ripple effects of this decision will be felt for years to come, influencing both domestic and international policies.